Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to provide you with an update as to what's happening in Argentina. As I'm sure you'll be aware if you follow the channel, inflation passed 100% in February 2023, and the latest figures reveal that it's now hit a new high of 109%. Which means that over the course of the last 12 months, prices have more than doubled, and these runaway prices are causing a major crisis in the country. Now, in order to try to address its problems, in 2022, Argentina agreed a $44 billion bailout facility with the IMF. However, as with all IMF facilities, the government of Argentina now have to implement a variety of changes. And one of the key areas that the IMF have identified is interest rates. And interest rates in Argentina have now risen to 97%. And just to be crystal clear, I didn't say 9.7%, I said 97%. And just to make things a whole lot more exciting, there is an upcoming presidential election in October 2023, and the current president has now announced that he has no intention of running for office. So he's basically walking away from the situation. His second-in-command, who was recently arrested on fraud charges, has also announced that she has no intention to run for office, and the leader of the opposition party and the former president has also confirmed that he doesn't want the job. So not only is the country in an economic crisis, it's also now facing a political crisis. So in today's episode, we'll have a look at exactly what's happening with inflation. We'll look at interest rates and see how Argentina compares to interest rates for all of the other countries in the world. We'll talk about the Argentine peso, because as inflation has been going up, the value of the peso has been crashing. We'll talk about the IMF bailout facility. We'll have a look at what the impact of runaway prices is having on the people of Argentina. We'll talk about the government situation and the presidential election. And then finally today I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think is likely to happen in the country over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. This chart shows the movement in the rate of inflation over the course of the last 12 months. And one thing to note here, that this bar chart doesn't start at 0. The bottom of the axis on the right hand side is 60%. So as you can see, this time last year, inflation was running at 61% in Argentina. However, over the course of the last 12 months, we have seen consistent rises in that rate. And the current rate for April 2023 is 108.8%. So you may be thinking, well, high rates of inflation in Argentina isn't really big news. But this chart shows the movement over the last 25 years. And as you can see, the current rates of inflation are significantly higher. Inflation has been a repeated problem in Argentina, rising to around 40% briefly in 2003, before coming back down below 20%, and then rising again to around 40% in 2016, and hitting 60% in 2020 before the COVID pandemic. However, the rate of increase and the absolute level of inflation that Argentina has experienced over the last 12 months has not been seen in the country for more than 30 years. And this chart shows the movement in food inflation over the last 12 months. And as you can see, it follows a very similar pattern to general inflation. However, the figures are actually higher. And food inflation in April 23 has come in at 115%, which obviously means that the price of food has more than doubled compared with this time last year. And as we've discussed many times before on the channel, the problem with food inflation is that it's indiscriminate. It impacts on everybody in society. And the poorest people are hit the hardest because they don't have any savings, and therefore they don't have any capacity to be able to spend more on food. And so they're making decisions as to whether or not they buy food or put heating on or pay their rent or some other form of expenditure. And that becomes a major problem. And that's why the people of Argentina are so unhappy, and we're now seeing protests in the street. And just to put current food prices into perspective, this chart plots the history over the last 25 years. And as you can see, the current rates of food price increases are much higher than what Argentina has experienced historically. And this point really underlines why the current crisis is one of the worst in Argentinian history. And this table shows the current highest recorded rates of inflation in the world. And as you can see, Argentina is ranked at number 4. The only countries that have higher rates of inflation are Syria at 139%, and that's a war-torn economy. Venezuela at 156%, and Venezuela has been heavily sanctioned since 2019, and Lebanon, whose official rate of inflation was last recorded at 264%. And if you're interested in finding out more details as to what's going on in Lebanon, please check out the video that I posted recently. And if we have a quick scan down the list to see which countries have lower rates of inflation than Argentina, so theoretically are doing better, we've got countries including Zimbabwe, Sudan, Iran, Haiti, Cuba, Turkey, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Ethiopia, all of whom are in the middle of economic crises. This chart shows the movement in the official rate of interest in Argentina over the last 12 months. And once again, the scale on the right-hand side of this chart doesn't start at 0. The base level is actually 20%, and the top level is 100%. So as you can see from this chart, the official rate of interest in Argentina has been running at a high level for the last 12 months. This time last year, the official rate of interest was 40%. However, today, the official rate is now up to 97%, with the authorities bringing in a 600 basis point or 6% increase on the 15th of May, which followed on from a 1,000 basis point or 10% increase on the 27th of April. So within the space of 3 weeks, the central bank increased rates by 16%. And just to put that into context in terms of all of the complaints that we've heard from countries all around the world about the rapid rise in interest rates, the current rate of interest in the Eurozone is 3.75%. In Australia, it's 3.85%. In the UK and Canada, it's 4.5%, and in the USA, it's 5.25%. So I've used this phrase before, but Argentina is truly off the scale in terms of its rate of interest. And this chart shows the movements in the official rate of interest and also the rate of inflation dating back to 2018. And it shows that Argentina has been trying to tackle inflation by increasing interest rates. However, unfortunately, over the course of the last 12 months or so, that policy has not proven to be successful. And in terms of where it's sitting on a global comparison, it's the second highest interest in the world. The only country that has a higher rate of official interest is Zimbabwe, where it's 150%. The next highest rate is Venezuela, which is just under 60%. We've then got 29.5% in Ghana and 27.3% in Sudan. And one of the reasons why the Argentinian authorities are racking the rates up so high is because it's a requirement from the IMF as part of their bailout facility.
Last month, Argentina reworked a $44 billion loan with the IMF, obtaining nearly $10 billion in fresh cash in exchange for measures to strengthen public finances and start reducing persistently high inflation.
Debemos estar más unidos que nunca.
President Fernandez is calling for unity, asking his fellow Argentines to please look towards the future. He says his finance minister is working on the issues and blamed some of the problems on the country's drought.
The New Deal includes an economic program that Argentina must comply with in order to receive disbursements every 3 months. The problem is that the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the worst drought in years have further complicated the economy, making it more difficult for Argentina to meet its obligations.
When you look at the new agreements and you consider how the agreements have been in the past, it has been much more flexible. And with the war and the drought, all agreements were reviewed and adapted to the economic reality.
The IMF summary from their most recent review in April 2023 stated that Argentina's 30-month extended fund facility arrangement with access to $31.9 billion was approved on March the 25th, 2022, and is linked to the implementation of policies to strengthen public finances, tackle persistent high inflation, improve reserve coverage, and set the basis for sustained and inclusive economic growth. The report went on to state that real interest rates should remain sufficiently positive to tackle high inflation and support demand for peso assets. Further rate increases may be warranted in the event of further inflation shocks or intensification of forex pressures. The rate of crawl should continue to support competitiveness. So basically what the IMF is saying here is that Argentina needs to tackle its high inflation by increasing interest rates. And that's exactly what the government have done. But clearly, if you're a company or an individual in Argentina that wants to borrow some money, these rates of interest are completely unaffordable. And this will therefore discourage people from borrowing money, which will have a negative impact on the economy. So you can see that it's a really difficult balancing act, trying to tackle high levels of inflation while still trying to get economic growth.
Currency instability is a long-standing stain on the country. The last time Argentina saw inflation over 100%, back in 1991 when restaurants lined their walls with worthless bills and shop owners closed in protest.
This chart shows the movement in the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Argentine peso over the last 12 months. And what this shows is that this time last year, one US dollar was trading for around 119 pesos. Today, it's officially trading at just under 232 pesos, which means that the value of the peso has almost halved in the last year. And if we extend the chart out to show what's been happening over the last 5 years, you can see that 5 years ago, one US dollar was trading for around 22 pesos. So there has been a massive devaluation of the peso over that period. However, the situation is much worse than this, because the Argentine authorities are actually limiting the amount of pesos that can be exchanged for US dollars at the official rate. So the vast majority of transactions are taking place on the black market. And this chart plots the black market exchange rate between the US dollar and the peso over the last 12 months. And this shows that 1 year ago, one US dollar was trading on the black market for 206 pesos. And today, one US dollar is trading for 485 pesos. So that is more than double the official rate. And this chart really shows the problems that Argentina is experiencing right now, because the vast majority of their population don't want to be holding pesos because they are declining in value on a daily basis. So everybody feels much more comfortable holding US dollars, and that situation is the definition of dollarization. When a country gets to the point where its citizens feel more comfortable holding the US dollar rather than its own currency, it's very difficult to be able to turn that around.
An economic crisis worsening by the day. Argentina becoming unaffordable for essentially its whole population.
Yo veo mucha gente necesitada,
A lot of people in need, people in the streets, and a need for more jobs, said this man, as his country holds the unsettling place of second worst inflation in Latin America, only behind Venezuela. I have zero capacity to save. Compared to last year, what I could have saved dropped by 60 or 70%, said this woman, adding the inflation in Argentina feels like never before.
This airport in Argentina's capital is filled with homeless people. It's a snapshot of an economic crisis that's getting worse. The Buenos Aires Jorge Newbery Airport has become an unofficial shelter for people like Laura.
Hay muchísima gente. Entraron más ahora.
There's a lot of us sleeping here. In a few hours there'll be more. If you come at night, it's full of people. We come here because it's cold out. Here at least we can sleep.
Roxana gets a government pension of about $200 a month. With an unexpected exchange rate, she often ends up with less. One local charity says the number of people without a roof over their heads has soared 30% since 2019.
If I pay rent, I don't eat. And if I pay for food, I'm on the street.
Argentina's annual inflation reached more than 100% in February. People have faced double-digit inflation for years, but this is the first time since 1991 it's been in triple digits. The frustration is growing. Earlier this week, protesters demanded a salary increase in line with the rising cost of living. Families say a government deal to restructure its $45 billion loan with the International Monetary Fund has yet to filter down and make a difference. Back at the airport, Argentinians like Elizabeth say they feel forced to leave.
I'm going to France. I found a job there. Here the situation is difficult. My salary is not enough to pay rent. It doesn't matter how much they raise my salary. Inflation is too high.
She's among thousands of Argentinians who've decided to leave, hoping one day, if things get better, to fly to that same airport and get back home.
Holding torches and banners, they marched down some of the most iconic streets of downtown Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. The march, organized by worker unions, is the latest in a series of anti-government protests. Workers like Silvia Sarabia say the government is not doing enough to alleviate a galloping yearly inflation. Those who have a formal job get wages under the poverty line, she says. That's why these protests are so big. Workers say the government of Argentina is taking money from the working class to pay the International Monetary Fund. President Alberto Fernandez admitted there are problems to be solved, but pointed to 30 months of job growth in the country.
Economic experts say if the government is spending more than it collects in taxes, there are only two solutions.
Either they print money that creates inflation, or they issue new debt. This government totally destroyed the possibility of issuing new debt, so they have to finance primarily by printing money.
President Fernandez announced Friday he will not seek re-election, but whoever hopes to replace him at Casa Rosada, Argentina's presidential palace, will have to convince voters in October that he or she has what it takes to tackle the enormous challenge of stabilizing the economy.
But the move opening up a political vacuum of sorts. His vice president, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, found guilty of corruption, which she denies, also says she's not running. Neither is center-right opposition party leader and former President Mauricio Macri. As the country's leaders step back, the country preparing for a presidential election this fall in hopes that someone can save Argentina from its own economy.
So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video to provide you with an update as to what's happening in Argentina. And as you've seen from all of the data that we've been through, things are getting worse. Inflation has increased once again, and in order to try to address that, the central bank and the authorities have increased interest rates by 16% within the space of 3 weeks. And the official rate of interest in Argentina, loan shark territory, that's the sort of thing that you do down back streets, and when you can't pay it back, somebody comes around with a baseball bat to your house to have a little chat with you. So basically what the authorities are doing here is cutting off any lending options for companies and individuals. And there are two main drivers as to why they're doing this. Firstly, they want to bring inflation down. And official logic tells you that when you put interest rates up, it discourages people from spending, and therefore there should be a reduction in demand, and therefore there should be a reduction in prices. However, the other reason that they've done this is because the IMF have told them that they have to as part of the bailout conditions. And as you saw earlier in the video, there's been a lot of public protest about the IMF and how they're managing the loan facilities with Argentina, the amount of influence and control that they're exerting on the government. The people of Argentina simply don't want the IMF telling their government what they should be doing. And the net result of all of this is that Argentina is in a real mess, and the politicians who've been running the country have all decided that they don't want to be involved in the presidential election that's coming up in October. Argentina desperately needs somebody to step up, take control, and put the economy back on track. But unfortunately, nobody seems to want to do it, and that's going to cause major problems. If a strong politician doesn't step forward with a defined plan as to how to sort out all the problems in the economy, there is a very real chance that over the next 3 to 6 months, things could get even worse than they are now. They're fairly serious today, but this situation could easily spiral out of control, and if it does, there is a possibility that the IMF could cut off any further drawdowns of their facility, which would lead Argentina severely up the creek without any paddles. So the next few months are going to be absolutely critical for Argentina, and I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, interesting and thought-provoking. If you liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.